Good morning, everybody. How are you today? You well? Hopefully you can hear me. I'm just getting over a flu, so I'm a little bit croaky-voiced. It's fantastic to follow Christine, because actually, she's done half my presentation for me, so thank you, Christine. It's fantastic. But actually, what's really great is she's giving the Silicon Valley perspective, and I'm going to give the European and London-based perspective. And where I would say is we're probably 15, 20 years behind where Silicon Valley is. So you can see where you can be in the far future. And I'd like to say that Europe is sort of partway there. And I just want to share some more stories about where I've come from. So first of all, I know it sounds terrible to call my business after myself, Bindi Ventures, but my background is Indian, and the Bindi is the third eye. And actually, my business is focused on ecosystem. By way of background, I launched Microsoft Ventures, or startups, in Europe, in London, and also the Entrepreneur Banking Business Unit for Silicon Valley Bank in London. And obviously, working with thousands of entrepreneurs, I created my own advisory firm. And really what I do is I work with a combination of early-stage startups, usually the level that 500 work with. I work with corporates, so corporate innovation teams, because of my background. I'm actually working with one VC fund in Europe, a growth stage fund called Draper Esprit. So yes, associated with the Draper funds in Silicon Valley. And actually one of the reasons I believe I was invited here is I do a lot of work with government, particularly the EU. So really what I want to talk about today is some of the work I've been doing with EU and how hopefully that can help you and some of the initiatives that are going on there. And then secondly, my view on ecosystem building. And it's actually very similar to Christine, so I can really gloss through that. But what I'll do is I'll talk about what's been happening in London the last 20 years. So hopefully that will give you some good insights. So first of all, I'm going to talk about Brad Feld, who's from another incubator called Techstars, and also a big fund as well. And what he created was this is actually a really interesting book that I'd love to recommend you read. It's quite old. It's from 2012. It's called Startup Communities. But he created something called the Boulder Thesis. And I believe this actually works on a global basis. So this is something to really think about when you're trying to build that ecosystem over here in Korea. So first of all, the components of the Boulder ecosystem. It's about the leaders. And in his view, the leaders are actually the founders and the entrepreneurs, and they're really the ones driving it forward. The feeders, and I would say the feeders are everybody else in the ecosystem. So the corporates, the government, the advisors, and again, I'll go into deeper depth into this. But actually, it's about the leaders and the feeders working together over a long-term period, in this case, Brad's saying a minimum 20 years, and I can certainly sort of showcase that story of the last 20 years of London, where they really work together. The community matters, and I know, again, Christine mentioned that, but all of you guys here, to me, are a great part of the community. And when I was back in the speaker room, I met some great people from Kita, from the Korea Startup Forum. Just I could already see that, while you're newer, I can already see the components of that ecosystem in already many of you people here. And I look forward to getting to know, some parts of the ecosystem over the next 2-3 days. And this is, to me, the most important thing. It's continual engagement. It's how all of these players continue to work together and grow and scale over time. I think, to me, that's very, very, very important. It's not just you have one interaction. You have many, many, many interactions over many, many, many years. And certainly that's how I've been working across not just London, but also the European ecosystem. And this quote, I'm just going to let you read, because actually, to me, this is very important. It's the magic of who is in the room. And again, I'm hoping, and I can see with the people that are in this room, let's see what kind of magic happens over here over the next 2 days at this event. And then finally, for me, it's about building bridges and relationships. Very, very, very important. A lot of my business and about connecting between those 4 pillars of my own ecosystem business, it's about the relationships I have. So I can pick up the phone, help one of my startups with fundraising, I can talk to the corporates and help them understand how to engage, but it's really about the long-term relationships and friendships I've built. So that's kind of me, the basis of ecosystem. And I've used that as my hypothesis for how I've worked in London, how I've worked in my days at Microsoft, at Silicon Valley Bank, and now also with the work I'm doing at Draper Esprit, and also with my own business. So what's happening in Europe? First of all, I know this is quite small, but actually, we really, the European Commission has launched this group called the European Innovation Council. And what they were looking at was the next wave of breakthrough and disruptive innovation. And absolutely, so much of that disruptive innovation comes from here in Korea. And really, we're looking at the past, the things like electricity in cars and telecoms, the current, where it's mainly US and Asian-led, a little bit of EU, and then who leads some of the future innovations? And some of this stuff we've taken from WIPO, MIT, World Economic Forum, and these are where we think places that Europe can be strong. So for example, gene therapy, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, autonomous vehicles, quantum computing. There's a lot of that stuff going on in Europe, but not enough funding happening in that space. And I think the other thing I can say about Europe is these bubbles over here really talk about, excuse me, I need a sip of water. And what we can say is Europe, there are 27, countries post-Brexit, and you can see that these bubbles are where the European cities are with at least one scale-up company. So obviously you can see in UK there's quite a few, but actually these systems are rich, but they can only it can only be reached their full global potential if they're better interconnected. And that's kind of a lot of the work I've been doing across Europe. In terms of global funding by region, you can see Asia, 81 billion, a lot of that driven out of China. US is 102 billion. Europe is mainly 21 billion. So we're a lot smaller than both sides of the pond. And that's actually why the EU has set up this Innovation Council, because we understand if we're going to compete with the US and China, we have to do something now and putting money into it. And that's just really giving an insight about the kind of money that's been put into Europe. So, a lot has happened since 2013, actually a fair amount. There's only 6.5 billion put in. So the ecosystem has scaled quite significantly to about 22 billion. And I know a lot of the funding that has come into Europe over even in 2019, it's going to be significantly higher. So you can actually see we're a fast-growing, fast-scaling ecosystem. And then sort of here, looking at the European Innovation Cities Index in 2018, London continues to be at the top, but obviously with the Brexit word, we'll be out of that. But you can see sort of Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam, all of these cities, you can see a lot of great innovation and acceleration going on. In fact, this week there's a great conference happening in Helsinki called Slush. I believe there's a big Korean delegation that's going to be there. It's really cold in Helsinki, but it's cold here. It's really dark. It gets very dark very early. But it's incredible. You get about 25,000 people from all across the innovation ecosystem. And Slush does tend to bring a lot of people in from Asia as well. They do a Slush in Tokyo. I don't know if they do anything in Seoul yet, so you might want to convince them to do something here. But again, it's a great event. And what I find is a lot of these cities, I travel a lot between all of them, and I'm starting to see a lot of the collaboration between these cities. So the European Innovation Council, which I sit on, it was actually founded by the Innovation, Science, and Research Minister, from the former cabinet, Carlos Moedas. It's now led by Commissioner Maria Gabriel. But really what they realized is in order to, do you remember those bubbles where Europe is only 21 billion and the US is 100+ billion in innovation and investment? Actually, let's start to put money in from a government level into founders, into university research and innovation, and also into the venture capital funds to really give it a kickstart. And let's focus on deep tech as well. So let's really focus on the technical innovations that take a lot longer to get to market. And one of the interesting differences between US and Europe is, and Christine, you can probably agree with me on this one, American VCs tend to invest in companies at a much earlier stage and on the back of a good idea. European VCs tend to take they're a little bit more risk averse. So they'll invest in the company when there's a product, maybe when there's a first customer, when there's proven traction in the business. So what do you do pre that when you're building a deep technology product, and it could take 3, 5, 7 years to build that technology out because it's so intense. And that's exactly why the European Innovation Council was founded, to really plug that gap in super early funding before the folks like 500 startups, before the growth stage VCs like I work with come on board. And so it's very, very interesting. This is a lot of writing, ignore it. The only thing you need to see is between 2018 and 2020, 3 billion euros are being put directly into the founders of these companies. And basically what happens is there's 2 different ways they put the money in. There's Pathfinder, which is researchers and technologists, so it's really super early stage. It could be university-led discovered innovation. They're giving grants to the people in this category. And then secondly, the accelerator is putting money into startups, SMEs, and entrepreneurs. And that's really down to pitching and mentoring. You're getting grants from about 250K up to 2.5 million. And that's really giving the founders the runway they need to get to a level that the VCs are feeling more comfortable to invest in them. And it's been actually very, very successful so far. Almost all of the 3 billion has been deployed. And actually right now in Brussels and next week, you're going to have a whole bunch of startups coming to pitch, and you're going to have really good mentors and advisors to help choose where that money goes. Sorry. Under Horizon Europe, we have, sorry, 10 billion euros funding that would be coming up from 2021 to 2027. So if you can take a minute to read that while I get my voice back, excuse me. One more sip of water, it's back, thank goodness. The joy of flus. But the point being is this is an incredible program, and this is where the government is stepping in to fund. So maybe some food for thought from the government organizations in this room. So this is my take on an innovation ecosystem. Quite similar to Christine's, but this is what I've seen happen in London. Again, I've got 8 components, exactly like what Christine saw. But what I've done is I've actually overlaid Brad's hypothesis. So to me, the grassroots and community, the entrepreneurs, are the leaders, and the rest are the feeders. So the London story. I'm going to talk about the last 10 years in London. So 2008 was the recession. And actually back then is when I sort of founded the Microsoft startup ecosystem there. And back then it was just literally entrepreneurs, grassroots, and some universities going on there as well. I call this the seeds are sown. And I would actually say in Silicon Valley this would have been 99. Christine, what do you think? This is around the time Google was founded, and for me this is really the bare beginning. So yeah, 99 is kind of what I say. This is 2008 in Europe. So I'd love to see where you think it is in Korea, actually. And then you've got some investors. You've got some of the old VCs that were around in the dot-com times in 2000, and they survived the nuclear winter. And you have some corporates. And the corporates I would say that were there were sorry about this. Excuse me. Microsoft, and Amazon. Excuse my terrible voice. In 2010 to 2012, again, things were starting to take shape. And what I would call out here is the government involvement. Back then, in about late 2010, early 2011, number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister's office launched something called Tech City. And they started to put money, and I don't know if many of you have heard about Tech City, but it's now called Tech Nation in the UK. It's well worth learning that story. And the Prime Minister and his special advisors put money in, and then actually renamed a startup area called sort of East London, Silicon Roundabout. And that's when the government really started to come in. They also started to put in policies like the entrepreneur visa. And I don't know if you have anything like that around, but it's all about, you know, immigration, policy, taxation. And that really started to come in, and more corporates started to get involved. Some accelerators and co-working spaces were there, and advisors were starting to take place as well. I've actually written a chapter about this in a book, and I'm very happy to share this with the people in the organization, like people in the audience, and I'll share that through the Korea Startup Organization. But this chapter really talks in detail about the kind of people and everything that we're getting involved. 2013 to 2014 was hyper-growth, and that was really when the startups started to become scale-ups. We had corporates such as Silicon Valley Bank. Google was launching Campus. We had Telefonica, one of the largest telecom operators in the world, launching their accelerator, Wyra. We had a lot of the beginning of our biggest unicorns in Europe beginning, so Deliveroo was launched at that point. Revolut was founded at that point. TransferWise was founded at that point. So a lot of the biggest European unicorns that you may have heard of on this side of the pond have now actually started to grow and scale and get the super funding rounds. So you were beginning to see the ecosystem starting to take place. But there's still, a lot of these bubbles were working quite separately. But you were beginning to see the growth. You were beginning to see the super rounds that you're seeing today. And then 2015 to 2017, unicorns and scale-ups. And hopefully, hopefully this will show you that this is the potential that you could have, again, from that's here. And now, 2018 to present, we're a globally recognized ecosystem. We're seen, compared to Silicon Valley, we're compared to New York, we're compared to a lot of places around the world where London is globally recognized. But that came from 10 years of hard work and collaboration and working. So we are that. And I just wanted to finish off with some great statistics about what we're seeing in London. So 61% of growth investment for scale and digital firms. 35% of Europe and Israel's tech unicorns have been created in the UK. 6.3 billion venture investment, which is small by Silicon Valley standards, but it's very big for European standards. 56% growth rate for London tech scale-ups. So it's really the fastest in the world for scale-up growth. 80% are driving UK tech advantage. So, you know, I'd say a lot of those scale-ups, 5 of the 6 billion come from there. And then in terms of, UK ranks 4th in the world after US, China, and India in terms of level of scale-up. So you can actually see, if you go backwards, you can see the growth of these companies from beginning to end. So that is it. And I really apologize for my coughing. My flu should have ended. But I hope that gives you an insight about what we're seeing in London and in Europe and how it nicely ties into a lot of the stuff that Christine has been doing in Silicon Valley. And I look forward to learning more about the Korean startup ecosystem while I'm here. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much.